The wagon is empty.
What?
No, I searched it myself.
Where could it be? Who could have done this? Someone who doesn't want them alive.
January 31st, 1896. Southern New Mexico Territory. A lawyer named Albert Jennings Fountain leaves Lincoln after completing court proceedings tied to a series of livestock theft indictments. He is traveling with his 8-year-old son, Henry. They are heading home toward Mesilla. They never arrive. Days later, their wagon is found abandoned along a remote stretch near White Sands. No witnesses come forward. No immediate explanation is confirmed. And what begins as a missing persons report quickly becomes one of the most contested investigations in territorial history. This is the case of a man who challenged powerful land interests and disappeared before he could testify to the consequences. Albert Jennings Fountain was not a passive legal figure. By the 1890s, he had become one of the most active prosecutors in the New Mexico Territory. Court records show he secured approximately 32 indictments against 23 individuals involved in livestock theft and property disputes. These cases were not minor disputes. They directly affected powerful ranching networks and political alliances in the region. Fountain's work placed him in direct opposition to figures tied to regional land control systems, including Oliver M. Lee and William McNew. At the same time, Fountain was also politically opposed to attorney and political figure Albert B. Fall, who represented several individuals connected to these disputes. The territory was not yet a state. Law enforcement was fragmented, and influence often carried more weight than formal procedure. On the final day of January 1896, Fountain concluded his legal work in Lincoln. He began traveling southwest with his son Henry. Their destination was Mesilla. The route passed through isolated desert terrain near White Sands. At the time, the region was sparsely populated and lightly monitored. There are no confirmed witness accounts of the journey's final segment. What is known is limited to what was later recovered. Search efforts began after Fountain failed to arrive home. Days later, investigators located a wagon along the route. It was disabled and partially abandoned. Personal items belonging to Fountain were recovered nearby. Evidence suggested the journey had been interrupted unexpectedly. However, no physical remains of Fountain or his son were recovered at the scene. This absence would become the defining feature of the case.
The wagon is empty.
What?
No, I searched it myself.
Where could it be? Who could have done this? Someone who doesn't want them alive.
Before his disappearance, Fountain had been involved in extensive legal action targeting cattle theft operations in the region. These indictments included individuals connected to Oliver M. Lee and William McNew. Historical accounts confirm that Lee operated in the Tularosa Basin region and was associated with armed ranching conflicts during this period. Fountain's legal actions disrupted established economic and political arrangements tied to land control. At the center of this conflict was a network of legal and political alliances involving attorney Albert B. Fall, who would later represent individuals linked to the investigation. The legal environment was highly unstable. Witness protection systems did not exist in modern form, and intimidation was frequently reported in territorial court proceedings. As news of the disappearance spread, territorial authorities initiated search operations. Governor William Thornton authorized broader investigative involvement. Law enforcement efforts included local deputies, territorial officials, a private investigative assistance from the Pinkerton Agency, A prominent law enforcement figure, Pat Garrett, was later involved in efforts to pursue suspects connected to the case. Evidence gathered from the wagon site became central to early theories. However, no direct eyewitness testimony was ever confirmed regarding the final moments of Fountain's journey. Over time, investigative focus narrowed toward a small group of individuals: Oliver M. Lee, James Gilliand, William McNew. These individuals were linked through employment, ranch operations, and prior legal disputes involving cattle theft allegations. Attorney Albert B. Fall represented several individuals connected to these networks during later proceedings. Historical analysis consistently identifies this structure as a key factor in why the case remained unresolved. The combination of a limited forensic capability, political influence, and lack of surviving witnesses created a legal environment where definitive conclusions were never reached. Formal indictments were eventually pursued against individuals linked to the investigation. However, during trial proceedings, witness testimony was limited, evidence was indirect, and prosecution arguments relied heavily on circumstantial reconstruction. The result was an acquittal. No individual was convicted in connection with the disappearance of Albert Jennings Fountain or his son. Following the trial, no further successful prosecutions were completed. The case remains unresolved for three primary reasons. First, no physical remains were ever recovered. Second, investigative methods of the time were limited by terrain, communication, and forensic capability. Third, the political and economic environment of territorial New Mexico created barriers to sustained prosecution. As a result, the case transitioned from active investigation into historical record. The disappearance of Albert Jennings Fountain is not only a missing persons case. It is a reflection of a time when law, land, and power were deeply interconnected in the American frontier, and a reminder that some investigations do not end with answers. They end with silence. This is Unhinged Cases. If you enjoyed this documentary, like, comment, and subscribe for more true investigative breakdowns every week.